always, is Jim Fitzgerald, also known as Fitz. Fitz, welcome. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well, Ray, and tonight there's only one Fitz on Cold Red, unlike last week when we had the Syracuse DA with us. So, but we do have another guest, and that is Chris McMullin, another good Irishman. Welcome, Chris. Third time on the show, frequent flyer, as we like to say on Cold Red. So, welcome aboard.
Thanks, you. Thanks. Good to be back.
You are a busy guy. You are the author of a book 3 decades old. You have a nonprofit called the Cold Case Initiative. We're going to talk about those later, but you and I have one big thing in common. We were both Bensalem Township, Pennsylvania police officers, except not at the exact same time. I left in '87. You came on board, what, 92-ish, 93?
92.
Yeah, 92. So we never actually crossed paths while there. But your career was spectacular. The time you spent there, you worked a lot of big cases. You took a little time. It wasn't your fault, but it took a while to solve some of them. I know that's one of them is 3 decades old. You discussed that case. So we're very happy to have you back on. You were in Bucks County Sheriff's Department for a while. You're now doing work as investigator in a public agency. But what we're going to mostly talk about tonight is the fact that you are the host of Philly Homicide, a TV show on Oxygen. Bring us up to date on that, some of the episodes, and maybe 1 or 2 that may be coming up in the near future.
Yeah, we're now in season 2 of Philly Homicide, which is very exciting. We were greeted, with a lot of support in season 1, and we even got nominated for a Critics' Choice Award out of the gate in season 1, which I thought was fantastic. But we're back with season 2. We're about 7 episodes in now, and getting good feedback from it, which I'm very happy to hear.
Obviously, the name of the show, these are murder cases that occur not just within the city limits of Philadelphia, but obviously the suburbs, the counties surrounding it. So I know, and you were involved in some of them. Ray, you were involved in one of the episodes last year in season 1, right?
I was.
Episode 1 of season 1, yeah.
Yeah, the very first one. It was regarding the homicide of a Chester police officer, Mike Beverly.
Corporal Beverly, right.
Mm-hmm. Chris, how does the production change when you transition from being boots on the ground investigator to a narrator guiding a national audience through some of these cases?
It's definitely a different role. My biggest thing, and I may sound like a broken record, I may have said this before, but when I was first approached about doing this show, I wanted to make sure that it was just a very organic way of telling these stories. I didn't want any type of over embellishment or over dramatizing things. I just really wanted to be able to tell the stories in a way that showed the dedication of the investigators involved, the police, the federal agents like yourself, and the prosecutors, and just how they have to dig down and how hard it really is, because as we all know, justice does not come easy. I mean, yeah, it's illegal to kill somebody, but it doesn't mean you're going to get justice. It's very difficult, and I wanted to show that, while at the same time giving the family, friends, loved ones of the victims a platform from which they could talk about their loved one, so that a lot of people could hear them, that they could sit there. And a lot of them said that, they found it to be a somewhat part of their healing process. I don't think you ever heal from that, but, they found that it was almost cathartic for them to be able to talk about that person. And that's really what I wanted. I wanted to show respect for the victims and their families, and just show how hard the people in the criminal justice system work. And I think we've been doing a good job of that.
I agree. Fitz and Chris, you mentioned something, Chris, about how the locals come together with the federal investigators. And how does that really align? Now, you've had the opportunity and you've known Fitz and I, but working some of these cases, is it real easy, or does it work well when the locals come together with the feds, or is there difficulties involved there?
If there's a relationships already established and in place, I'd say yes, but sometimes out of the gate when you don't know one another. I think sometimes it's pretty easy to get off to a rough start.
Well, where do the investigations align? Where do they come together?
Well, they have a common goal, right? I mean,
True.
I think you need to establish that really fast out of the gate. It's not a. I always used to like to say, if you could take the egos out of police work, things would go a lot smoother sometimes.
Good point.
Yeah.
And the bosses too, some of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my answer to your question, Ray, would be that should be done right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
Let's have a sit down. Let's get on the same page.
I agree.
Yeah.
I have never really had a problem on a task force. Like I said, the big bosses, sometimes their egos will get ruffled. But I think when I was a FBI agent and even a profiler later, but first 7 years in New York, I tried to let it come out early on, working with NYPD or Westchester PD, other PDs we would be working a case with, that, oh yeah, by the way, I was a cop for 11 years. And I think not every agent can do that. It doesn't mean you're not a good agent if you weren't a cop beforehand. But sometimes if I go there and talk a little bit of the cop lingo, even though I was a smaller PD than NYPD, I think right away when they knew you wore the uniform, that kind of helps a bit. And this rumor that the feds are just here to steal your case, well, that certainly never happened on my watch, and it wouldn't happen otherwise. And Ray and I have talked about the Nancy Guthrie case enough. Who knows what happened down there when the FBI came into the sheriff's department there, and it seems like some feathers were ruffled. I would stay with probably more on the boss's level than anything else, but that's for a whole other story. But going back in time, let's talk about this episode that's going to be airing on June 20th on the Oxygen Network of Philly Homicide. It involves a 1975 case that Ray and I were involved in at the 25-year point. So I'll make it clear we're not quite that old that we were in law enforcement in 1975, although I was a rookie police officer in 1976. But we weren't involved in this case from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and it involved a young woman, 19 years old, named Lindy Sue Beechler. I think that's how it's pronounced. Is that right, Chris?
I think it's Beechler.
Beechler. Okay.
Beechler.
And,
you don't want me to tell you where I was in '76, do you?
No, thank you. But thanks for the offer, nonetheless. So you're not that much younger than us, okay? But just we were.
I can tell you where I was. I wasn't a rookie anywhere, so
yeah, okay.
I was in college.
I'm older than you guys.
I know you are. I respect my elders.
Yeah, you do.
As do I.
With that in mind, back in 2000, Ray, I know the Lancaster Police Department reached out to you to do what we always suggested as profilers. If a case is unsolved, and certainly a violent crime case, at the it could be the 10-year, like an even number, 20 or 25 quarter century mark, let's reinvestigate it. Let's bring in every asset we can. And Ray, do you remember the PD contacting you? Because Lancaster is out of the Philadelphia division. And why don't you go ahead, and they contacted you to do what?
That's why I was mentioning this earlier, Chris, when the feds and the locals come together and where the case aligns. You're right. We have a common goal here. And they came to me and they said, hey, look, we have this case. We have, we've exhausted it. We're coming up on 25 years. Is there any way for you guys to take a look at this and give us an assessment, a profile on this? Okay. And I said, yeah. I said, let's put it together. And putting it together and talking to them and being in the PD with them and looking at the files and then taking all those files and sending them down. And I sent them down to Jim, who happened to be the profiler that had responsibility for the Philadelphia territory. That's one of his areas. He was more of the Mid-Atlantic, but the Philadelphia area. And Jim looked at it and he says, hey, let's set up a meeting and bring these guys down. And that's what we did. I tell you what, that is, to me, is the most fun I usually have, is working a case like that. with guys that are trying to solve something that's a cold case. I've always had a special place in my heart for a cold case because, nobody else is working that. Nobody else cares, or they're worried about something else. Yet there's still somebody out there. There's still families out there. There's still victims out there that are struggling and saying, "Hey, am I ever going to get an answer to this?"
Right.
And Jim and I eventually, I like to think we help contribute to what happened in this case in the long run. But we will leave that for a little bit later in the story, or we'll leave it till the show comes out and people get a chance to see it.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I'm the same way. I've always been very passionate about solving cold cases. At times, I used to sometimes even take some heat for it, but that's okay. I'm not worried about that.
Your track record shows that your intuitiveness and your stick-to-itiveness paid off in a number of different cases you've worked, Chris. And now you're done that stage of your life, but now you're presenting through the Oxygen Network and Philly Homicide cases that other agents and investigators worked. So, so why don't you walk us through a little bit, Chris, of what happened to poor Lindy, over 50 years ago now, certainly from your aspect of the show. And what will the audience be seeing on June 20th, that Saturday?
She was a young woman. I recently married. I think she was only 19 years old. As we said, it was either 75 or 76. And her husband at the time had a job where he worked the evenings, and they lived in an apartment. And while he was at work, she was brutally murdered in the apartment. And for a long time, it was not solved.
And as we always talk about on Cold Red, and other investigators know, you have to work from that inner circle. So the investigators would have been remiss if they didn't look into the husband. And
absolutely, yeah.
They did. He seems he had a rock solid alibi, but there are ways around that, and the investigators had to, of course, pursue every angle in that regard. Chris, Lindy Sue was sexually assaulted, and I think that was known early on, but I'm not sure they had all the evidence they would have needed for years later to make anything stick with that. And can you run a little bit of that part by our audience?
Yeah, it's my understanding that was exactly the case. They weren't able to trace that to any individual. I know that there was, and I'm sorry, I don't remember. There was another person that had been in the area that had quite a resume on his criminal history, and they took a good hard look at him as well. But eventually, they wound up clearing him of it as well.
Yeah, I think it was another rapist in that area, like a year
Right.
or two before and after. But I think they put him in prison at the time of Lindy Sue's assault. But the bottom line is, with the technology back in the mid 70s, they just couldn't. I'm not sure they could even confirm they had semen or any sort of bodily material left behind by the offender on her underwear, or at least it was inconclusive very early on.
Yeah, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that DNA evidence as we know it today, that didn't come around till the mid 80s, right?
Even later than that.
We're more than a decade premature for that here.
Yeah. So that, but back then you were lucky to get some kind of a sample, blood or something, and if you could even type it to O, A, B, whatever, negative.
Right.
That was a big positive. If you could find a suspect who also had, of course, O blood is the most common, I think, but at least you could put that person in the ballpark. But DNA, of course, changed all those rules. And without giving anything too much away here, let's just say that DNA did play an eventual role in this particular case. But going back 25 years or so after Lindy Sue's homicide, and 25 plus years ago from right now, I do remember this case very well. I remember, Ray, you had already dealt with the Lancaster Police Department investigators. I forget if the state police were involved at this point too, or maybe county DA's office
The
representative.
the DA's
I know the
office.
DA's office was, their detectives
Yes.
were involved. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And at least 2 or 3 of them came to Quantico, and we spent an entire day on this case. We call in all the other profilers, or at least as many as are available, usually 10 in the room, and they give us the entire case, usually in the morning, PowerPoint presentation. I think PowerPoint was around in 2000, but certainly slides, passing out reports, things like that, maps of the area, the victimology of Lindy Sue. Well, I remember going through the husband, and we said, look, he has no criminal record, no violence, no domestic issues. He has a lock solid alibi. He's denied it. I passed polygraphs. I said, we got to move on from him at that point. And we did put together a profile. I mean, after the day was over and we put everything together, and we gave it back to the investigators. Go ahead.
I want to, for our audience, just for our audience listening pleasure, I want them to understand what this process is really like. Because I'll tell you what, it's an unbelievable process what the Bureau does working with local law enforcement. And once the department comes to the field division, which was Philadelphia, where I was stationed at, and I was also laterally attached to the profiling unit as a coordinator for the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. Once we put that together, we send it down to one of the unit profilers. In this case, it was Jim. So we send it down to Jim, and Jim sets up a meeting that's going to take place where the investigators are going to come down and they're going to present that case before people they have no idea who they are. But all the people in that room are extremely qualified and have some of the best minds in the world. And
criminal minds, right?
Criminal minds, correct. And just after the show. So you're sitting in a big conference room and you're presenting this. We're going through everything. We're going through autopsy files. We're going through crime scene photographs. We're going through everything you can think of in a crime, and even the victimology, going through that. And everybody sits around and they talk about it, and they ask the investigators questions. And what happens is that whole time someone's there, one of the investigators is jotting down everything that's said in that meeting, because the profilers in that meeting are throwing out bullets and throwing out information that they're seeing in here that otherwise, if you just wait till the end, you're going to lose all that. So we tell them, hey, when you're in there, everything that's said, you got to write it down. You got to keep copious notes. It's almost like you're sitting in an interview. And what happens is that all comes together. And what happens is we spend that whole day. I'm talking from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. And then we come back the next day for sometimes a half day, sometimes another whole day. And we go through it again. And then what happens at the end, Jim will write up a report and send that report to the investigators. But the investigators, when they leave Quantico, they leave with a bucket full of things to do. And it's like you're getting a fresh set of eyes that are taking a look at this. It's really, really amazing. And for our audience, if you could ever experience something like this, it's one of the coolest things you'll ever be involved in, just to see it work. And boy, does it work. Now, it doesn't always identify who the individual is, but a lot of times it opens a lot of doors that otherwise you would think, I never thought of that. I never looked at this. I never thought of that. So this is a really, really good thing that the Bureau does with local law enforcement. And it still happens today.
Thank God.
Yeah, I discussed some of this on the program, and you'll hear, again, a sort of a truncated version of what Ray ran through, but he's 100% right. And different profilers ran these consultations, as we call them, differently. What I always prefer doing is, because on many cases, or with many cases, the investigators will come with suspects in mind. And we talked a little bit already about some random guy in the Lancaster area who's committing rapes. But when I was running these things, I always said, I don't want to know who your suspects are up front. And they wouldn't send me anything in the reports. I'd want to sit and hear the case, and I would review some of it beforehand, but not the suspect. I'd always say, mail it in to me, Ray, I would do this through you. Send it in to me. but leave the suspect information in a separate packet. I didn't want to be influenced by perhaps who the investigators thought may be logical. Doesn't mean they're right or wrong or, somewhere in the middle, but obviously they didn't have enough probable cause to make an arrest. So I always wanted to have my, a clean slate when I'm looking at the crime itself and come up with my profile, my behavioral characteristics of their offender. And more often than not, and Ray, you've been in the room with me, we'd finally, I would give that information to them. And sometimes the investigators would look and say, that's exactly the guy we have as a suspect. I mean, what you described is this guy, Joe Smith from wherever. And it felt good that the program, the concept, the system does work. Does it always mean they can go out and put handcuffs on that guy the next day? No, as you said, Ray. But I'd like to see that we had a consistency level. There was a rhyme, a reason, a protocol, a method to our madness that worked more times than it didn't. So, Chris, real quick, I know you weren't involved in that case back then. I'm trying to think of all the other cases you worked. Did you ever make a trip to Quantico? Some other Ben Salem officers did for one of these consultations.
I made a trip to Quantico for the Rowan case.
That's right. That was after I left, I believe,
Yes.
in 07, I believe, when I left. So, yeah, so you experienced one of these consultations?
It never got to that. I actually wanted that. My first trip down there was for the laboratory, was for forensics.
Gotcha.
And it was what you just described was posed, and unfortunately it just never happened.
Okay.
I wish it had, but I was down there for forensic reasons, which actually it took a while because of the backlog, but it did yield some very, very helpful results.
And you eventually resolved that case, correct?
Correct. Yeah, that case happened in August of '84. It was a 14-year-old girl that had been raped and murdered in the Trevo section of Ben Salem. A suspect had been developed, but it was what they had on him was very, very circumstantial, and the district attorney didn't feel that charges were warranted at that point. And unfortunately, the case went cold, and that I reopened it around 2002. So the case was about 16 years old when I started looking into it again, and worked on it for a long time. I mean, I was working other jobs at the same time, but I reopened it in '02, and we made 2 arrests in the fall of 2015. So it took quite a while, but he's still in jail. So we got our guy.
I'll never forget, I left the Ben Salem PD in November of '87, and I think it was December of '87 or January of '88, a body was found in Publickers,
Yes.
State and Street Road, literally weeks after I left. I remember reading about it. I came home every weekend from Quantico to Ben Salem, or at least after the 6-week point, Ray, as you know how that works.
Mhm.
And then how many years did it take you to eventually identify her? I know it's not technically solved, but you were so close when you left.
Well, I found that case right around the time I started looking at the Rowan case. I had just made detective in 2000, and it was '02 when I started reopening the old cases. And after I found the Rowan case, I said, what else do we have around here? And the next file I found was the Publicker case. And when I opened, none of them were in the computer. These are all dusty binders that I had to dig out. And the first thing I see when I open the binder is this big photograph of a human skull. And I kept going through it, and what you were describing, the discovery, they had found the skeletal remains, entire skeleton of a young woman who was actually pregnant. Along with her remains were fetal bones. And she was found in what I would call, I described it as somewhat like an underground bunker. It was a pump house of this old defunct distillery. And in the photographs, there was large pipes and valves and things like that. So that chamber had something to do with the distillery process. You had to enter through the ground. A concrete bunker came out of the ground about 2 feet, and there was an opening, and there was a steel ladder that was bolted to the side, and that's how you got down. But what happened was somebody was back there walking their dog, and they looked down and they saw this skeleton laying there looking back up at them. And she was never identified.
Until
It took a while, until I think it was around January of 2020, I think 20 or 21, through investigative genetic genealogy with DNA. And I had tried everything else. I had tried isotope analysis. I had her DNA into the CODIS system, hoping that I would get a hit on a family reference sample of a missing person. There was even a time that I thought she was another girl that was missing from Ben Salem. And when I got mitochondrial DNA sample from this missing girl's brother, I uploaded that and I'm like, it's going to be her. It's going to be her. And it wasn't a hit. And then a week later, I got a hit on the brother's DNA, and that was a Jane Doe in Buena Township, New Jersey. So I was all over on that case. But yeah, with investigative genetic genealogy, we did identify her, and her name was Lisa Todd, and she was from Northeast Philadelphia, lived right off of Harbison Avenue, and maybe 15 minutes away from where she was found.
And Ben Salem, the disposal site was, yeah, like you said, a couple miles from where she grew up, or at least where she hung out. And
10, 12 miles. Yeah.
Someone knew that area, and I knew that area well. I didn't know it when the distillery was there, but we've discussed a few cases since the Lindy Sue Beekler case, but on our podcast tonight. But that's fine, because you've had so many successful cases. And what's the book 3 Decades Cold that you wrote?
Right.
That was about which one of those cases?
It talks about Lisa Todd. It talks about the Barbara Rowan case. And I originally started writing it just about the Barbara Rowan case. But as I was writing the book, these other cases that I was working on, I was getting breaks on. So part of that book was actually written in real time. The Lisa Todd case, and another one, another victim named Mary Beth Hodgkinson, who was another skeletal Jane Doe that we had found in 1995.
Yeah, for little Ben Salem Township, about 100 sworn officers there, northern suburb of Philadelphia. It's still a decent place to live, but it can be busy, and it's had its share of homicides. And thanks to you, Chris, and help with some DNA technology that's evolved over the years, which brings us back to Lindy Sue Beekler, the case on Philly Homicide. You'll read about that part. And again, I don't want to give too much away, but there's actually an international aspect to how this case was resolved. And it's a fascinating case. And let me add in here too, I know all three of us are VDOC Society members. And folks, if you're not familiar with the VDOC Society, VIDOCQ, it is it's a nonprofit cold case solving entity that meets the third Thursday of every month in Center City, Philadelphia, in the Union League building, and we try to solve cold cases from all around the country. We fly the officers in, detectives in, sometimes DAs or DA office people, and they present the case just like an FBI consultation, which we just described, although it's a little more compressed, and then we work it afterwards with a online group. But just to bring full circle here, my first ever attendance to a VDOC Society meeting was in the summer, I believe it was June of 2007, and that was the Lindy Sue Beekler case.
Was it?
Even 7 years after the 25-year anniversary, the Lancaster PD decided to submit their case to VDOC. I was not a member. I was still in the FBI in Quantico at the time in the profiling unit, but I was invited by the Lancaster PD and the VDOC people. I sat at the table, and here I'm watching them present a case. And actually, I went to the front of the room and gave my little 5-minute, spiel of the profile of the unknown subject, and we did our best to present that case in that regard. I know they got some good evidentiary information coming back after that VDOC meeting, but and we tried really hard, as we do in every case there, but we only get the toughest cases at the VDOC Society, and that one didn't come to pass then. But it did, of course, about doing the math here, 15 years later, Chris, as our audience and anyone who watches this episode on June 20th will find out.
Absolutely.
Ray, any input there into what we've been talking about?
No, it just I keep going back to some of the cases that we ran down through Quantico, and I remember, and I know you remember this case, Jim, the Amy Willard case, and I know
Oh, yeah.
you're familiar with this too, Chris. It was a young college athlete who, right off the Blue Route, which is a highway between the Pennsylvania Turnpike and Route 95 that runs up the East Coast, right off one of the off ramps, her car was found, and she was later found dead in Philadelphia, what they call a hole in the wall. And people think a hole in the wall. Well, a hole in the wall in Philadelphia was you have a house on each side, and where there used to be a house has been demolished, and they call that a hole in the wall. So she was found there, and she had some markings on her stomach area, chest area, and they thought it was from. Everybody thought it was from a tow truck because it was star shaped. And I remember we're looking at some of the crime scene photographs and some of the autopsy photographs. And Jim, I can't remember the doctor that was visiting, but that was there. Do you remember his name?
Yeah, he was an older
pathologist.
guy,
Yeah.
retired, and he would show up for these consultations.
Mhm.
He's long deceased. I forget his name too after all these years.
But we're sitting there, and I'm sitting with two troopers and a detective from Delaware County Criminal Investigative Division, two Pennsylvania State troopers. And he's looking at this, and everybody's thinking, we're talking about tow trucks and what kind of trucks have these type of star things. And this doctor goes, if I didn't know any better, I think she was run over by a car based on her injuries.
And the autopsy did not show that.
Right. And all of a sudden, the light bulb goes off, and the trooper, and we say, you got to give a call up and see, because we had an individual by the name we're looking at, Arthur Bomar.
Yep.
But we called up and said, hey, where's this guy's vehicle at? And one of the detectives up in the Philly area located it up in New Hope, Pennsylvania. It was hours from being crushed.
Wow.
And they were able to rescue the vehicle, and they were able to do an analysis of the oil pan underneath the car, and it matched perfectly to the markings on Amy Willard.
So that young woman didn't suffer enough at the hands of Arthur Bomar, raped, beaten over the head, also run over with the car. And but yeah, that was a difficult.
I remember
they're all difficult consultations.
But that just shows you what can happen in those consultations.
Yeah.
Something like that,
absolutely.
just boom, and you go, wow. And the next thing you know, within a month later, this case is solved, and he's in custody, not only for Amy Willard's homicide, but he's also a suspect in another homicide, Maria Kubanis,
Right.
who was up in Bucks County.
Right.
And they wound up finding her in a bag next to a river outside of Philadelphia in Bucks County.
And he had already killed someone in Las Vegas like 8 years before. That's the whole Arthur Bomar case. Yeah, we're going all over the place down memory lane. I do cover that case, Ray, in my fourth book, the Amy Willard case. She was the daughter of a police officer.
Correct.
And actually, was the daughter of a Philly police officer. When all the information came out that it looked like Amy Willard was hitting it, and this is a lesson for everyone out there who's listening. Someone hits you in the back and you think you have a little accident, don't stop on the road there, certainly not a dark part of the road. Keep driving, get on your phone, and go into a police station or a well-lighted area and then exchange information, whatever. Amy Willard was bumped on the I-9 or the Blue Route, exit ramp by this killer, the serial killer, as he turned out, and he just took her from there. But that information went out, and a Philadelphia police officer told his daughter, who's like 19 or 20, hey, you ever get hit in the rear like that, don't pull over, just get away, go to a police station, whatever. She not only didn't pull over, as the car was driving by, she copied the tag down. And she called Philly police, told her dad, he called whomever, Delaware County State Police, and they put it together, Arthur Bomar driving this car, and that's what made that whole case come together. So We just auditioned about 3 different cases for Philly Homicide.
Yeah, we
Chris,
did. We
for
did.
season 3.
And they all, you know, it's like I said in the beginning, that's what I like to show. I like to show how the cases come together and how they're solved, because as we all know, it's never easy and it's never always the same.
No, it's not. It's not.
Chris, having said all of this and how these cases are difficult to solve, and some of this DNA technology is not cheap, you've started a nonprofit and it's called the Cold Case Initiative. Tell us
I
about
did.
that, how it started, what it does, and how anyone in our audience can even help.
So Cold Case Initiative, it's a nonprofit organization. It's a registered 501c3 charity. And that was really born out of my own frustrations and even coming from a well-funded agency that I worked at in Bensalem. There was times when, you know, when I would dust an old case off and I wanted to bring it up to current standards by using modern forensic technology. And I was told, well, you know, we don't have it in the budget. And I never let that stop me. I always found a way to get it done, whether I got it done pro bono or things like that. But so that's why I did it. I thought to myself, you know, these cases are all over the country. And if we could just raise money with the goal of offsetting those costs for other agencies, then we can make a difference. And again, you know, we were talking when we first started talking about cold cases, and I was saying how sometimes I would take heat for working them. You know, the families of victims of cold cases, they often feel forgotten. And if you can make a difference to them, it's worth it. You know, I remember, I'm going to go off on a tangent again, but when we made an arrest in the Rowan case, we were in Florida when we did that. And we wanted I had never told the family that we were working on the case because I didn't have any reason to ask them anything. And at the time, I didn't want to give them false hope because I didn't know if we were going to succeed or not. And some people have criticized me for that. And so it was the decision I made at the time. So anyway, when we made the arrest, it was 10 o'clock at night. We said, we have to call them before this hits the news, and they find out that way. And when we called, the first thing Mrs. Rowan said to us was, "Are you calling about my daughter?" And we said, yes. And she said, "I've been waiting 30 years for this phone call." And that's why you work on cold cases. So getting back to the nonprofit, I just felt compelled to do it. If I can raise some money, and I am not real good at fundraising. I'll tell you guys that right now. I'm still learning my way around, but my nonprofit has solved 2 cases so far, both Doe cases, a John Doe and a Jane Doe. But to those families, it made a huge difference. So I feel good about that. And there's other cases we're working on. We solved one case. It was a Bucks County case. It was a John Doe that was found in the Delaware River in 2003. And he had been buried in Doylestown as a John Doe. And I knew that the coroner's office had kept fingernails, hair, things like that. So I thought, that's the first case I'm going to go after because I don't even have to do an exhumation to get DNA to work for. We already have it. And by this time I was retired, but Bensalem agreed to let me work on the case, and we did it. And we actually solved it 20 years to the day that he was found.
Wow.
He was found, I think it was October 19th of 2003. And on October 19th of 2023, Bensalem detective went to their door in New Jersey. He lived in Riverside, New Jersey. That was the first one. And the second one was a woman named Mary Marlovitz, who was found in Pima County, Arizona.
Oh.
Yes. Yeah. How about that? And she was found in 1972. And just a few months ago, through investigative genetic genealogy, we identified her as well. So, like you said, especially with Ms. Marlovitz, I don't know what happened to her. I don't know how she wound up in that state there, but at least we've given her name back, and her family, she's no longer missing. I mean, as far as the investigation, I have no jurisdiction on that. I'm doing this as a civilian. But I like to I like to raise money and try and solve these cases. So if anybody wants to help solve a case, please go to my website. Donations are tax deductible and you will make a difference. I do not take a penny out of this website. I don't take a paycheck. It's all myself, another friend, and my wife run it. It's just a labor of love. So,
Chris,
Real quick, what is the website? And we'll say it again.
yeah, okay.
www.coldcaseinitiative.org.
And I happen to know you wrote a book, 3 Decades Cold, and you say all the royalties you get from that, you put right into Cold Case Initiative.
Any royalties I get from the book just get donated to Cold Case Initiative.
Yeah,
That's right.
That's very altruistic of you. Go ahead, Ray.
Chris, I've heard you mention this before. I want you to kind of tell our audience the starfish mentality.
The starfish story. Yeah, that's, if you go to Cold Case Initiative's website, you'll see I have a starfish in my logo. I wish I could take credit for writing the story, but I can't. It was written by a guy named Lauren Isley decades ago. And if you Google it, you'll find it. But in a nutshell, the starfish story is set on a beach after a bad storm, and there are thousands of starfish that have washed up upon the shore. There's a young boy and he's running along the shoreline and he's frantically picking up starfish and he's throwing as many of them as he can back into the ocean. And while he's doing this, he winds up crossing paths with this elderly gentleman who's very well educated. And he says, you know, young man, what are you doing? And he says, well, if I don't throw the starfish back in the ocean, they're going to die. And the man kind of laughs at him. He says, young man, take a look around. He says, there are thousands of starfish on this beach. How can you make a difference? And with that, the boy picks up another starfish, excuse me, throws it in the ocean and says, I made a difference to that one. And every family of a cold case, whether it's a John Doe or Jane Doe, because they're generally missing people, or a homicide victim and the case is not solved, they're starfish. That's how I look at them. You dedicate all this time and resources to a cold case, to one case, and you solve it, you make the difference to those families. And that was really what inspired me. So I think it's a fantastic story. You know, it tells it teaches a great lesson, and you know, I hope more people would embrace that same mindset.
You know, I'm going to make a comment here. You know, there's a great emotional weight that comes with holding on to decades old files. And there's always a case that has stood and kind of kept with me. And I think about it at least once a week, maybe more. The young boy, 12 years old, whose name was Mark Heimbach. He was from Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania, and he disappeared in Cape May.
New Jersey.
Just vanished. Jim, I'm sure you're aware of that. I don't know if you're aware of this one, Chris. But,
I think I've heard this.
Yeah, Mark Heimbach, a good buddy of mine with the New Jersey State Police, had the ticket. He had the case, and I remember him giving me a call
mid
in Philly.
80s or so, or
No,
early
that
90s?
was 1992.
Okay, early 90s. Okay.
1992 when this kid came up missing down there, and because it was Drexel Hill, it was in the Philly region, and I was recently new into the Philly division, and he wound up giving me a call up in Philly, and if I could give him a hand with that. And I was just getting involved in the profiling at that point, and in the early 90s. And we looked and we worked that, and I continue to think about that kid all the time. And I know the cases that you have and the cases you're aware of, Chris, that emotional weight, and you probably think about these people and these victims. And I do too.
I cried on the Paul Azan show when they profiled the Barbara Rowan case. I don't pony, you know, and I'm not embarrassed about that. I don't care, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's I'll have to look into that. I'll have to educate myself on that one. I just heard about another one, and I'm terrible with names, but the case is about 50 years old, happened in Chester County. It was a Boy Scout that was murdered on a camping trip.
At a Catholic church.
At a Catholic church, yeah.
I did some media work with that a few years ago. I think there's a docu coming out. I'm very much familiar with it. Very bizarre story. Yeah, I think it was mid-70s. I remember it in the media at the time as a young man, but obviously I didn't do any work on it. But
Yeah.
this is a very interesting segue. I'm going to make a few connections here. As I think both of you know, the one case that sticks in my craw is personal, and that's the case of my friend Joe Welsh,
Right.
who was murdered in 1998 in Philadelphia in a street robbery. And it's the one case we haven't solved. The reward is almost $50,000. And quite frankly, someone comes through, I'm going to round it off to $50,000 for the arrest and conviction of the killer of Joe. But and if you go back to January of this year, Ray, we did we interviewed the head of the Pennsylvania Citizens Crime Commission, and they facilitated getting Joe's information out there, posting the reward, all that kind of stuff. Well, they had their annual luncheon. In fact, I'm not sure, Ray, it was on the air or not, but when we got off the, but as we were ending our podcast back in January, Larry, the president, invited us to the luncheon in May. You couldn't make it. You had some personal things you had to do a few weeks ago. I went to that luncheon, and it was an award ceremony they do every year for local southeastern Pennsylvania law enforcement officers. And here's where sort of the connection comes in. A Ben Salem police officer, John Catrambon, is that how his name is pronounced, Chris?
Catrambon.
Catrambon. He received they break it into counties and Philly PD, and he received the Bucks County Award for bravery for confronting a shooter on a road rage situation. There were shots fired. The officer put him down, made the arrest and whatever, and obviously he took this bad guy off the streets. So I was there. So giving a shout out to Officer Catrambon, and however it's pronounced, and for the good work he did there. And I went up to him afterwards, shook his hand, said, "Yeah, we have something in common." He looks at me, "Oh yeah?" I said, "Yeah, former Ben Salem PD, but well before your time." And he said, "Oh, I appreciate it," and what have you. So I definitely appreciated being there a few weeks ago and seeing someone from my former police agency getting that award for a job very well done. So again, shout out to all the officers that day, including those who received the Presidential Award posthumously, and that was a Delaware State Trooper, Matthew Snook, and a Philadelphia PD officer, Andy Chan. Obviously, they were killed in the line of duty or died a few years after something, whatever. But their family was there, and so the very end of it was a difficult aspect to be through of that. But the awards were well deserved in the Philadelphia area as well as the counties around there. So I was glad to be at that. And I hope to be there from now on if we're invited back.
I've been there a few times. It's a very nice ceremony.
I have a feeling you have an award or two under your belt.
I've gotten a few. I got an award. We got it. Ben Salem, we got the our special victims unit got the citation unit award there a few years ago, and it was a nice time.
I don't want to leave. We're going to wind up here, but I don't want to leave on too heavy of a note. Chris, if folks don't know this, Chris also is a big-time Hollywood actor. Well, at least the back of your head has been in a number of movies, right?
I've done some extra work here and there. I had a couple, few lines here and there in a movie or a television show.
I was kidding. I watched that. Was it Law and Order? Once or twice.
SVU. I played a firefighter.
That's right.
I arrested Bradley Cooper in the movie Limitless.
And you were a stand-in for Alec Baldwin, right? In the
I was on the film The Departed. Yes.
That's,
yes,
not everyone can have the back of their head represent the front of someone else. No, I mean, it's good for you. You got in there, and hey, that's how Brad Pitt started, and it's not too late for you.
We'll see. I go in a lot more auditions than jobs, put it that way.
Well, I mean, if you're an agent out there or someone doing casting for a movie, TV show, you have a good-looking guy, we'll say late 30s, right, Chris?
Yeah, early 40s, late 30s.
You can look for that, and he definitely has some acting chops under his belt. So, again, the TV show is on the Oxygen Network. I mean, watch it every Saturday night. The one I happened to be on, they interviewed me over a few hours late last year, is airing on June 20th. Chris, of course, is the host. He will walk you through the case of Lindsay Sue Beekler that we just broke down a little bit here, but we're saving some of it there. And I think the ending, this has a different ending than a lot of, it's a resolution to this case, but it's different than some of the ones you'll have seen in other cases. And I give all due credit to the Lancaster PD and the other folks they brought in at the end. Ray and I were just little cogs there at the 25-year anniversary, but around the 45th anniversary, give or take, these guys really got to work, and the new DNA technology really.
It's unlike any
really
episode we've done, but it's a fantastic investigation. And
yeah,
all,
you're right, absolutely there. Ray, take us out. Any last statements or comments? Any questions at all?
I have one question for you, Chris. If there's an underfunded police department, what is the criteria or first step for them to apply for a grant through the Cold Case Initiative?
They can do it right through the website.
Is there instructions on there to be able to do that?
Yeah.
Great.
And so not just police officers, but our audience members out there, even $5 or $10 or $20 to, I'm sure it's all set up how they can donate.
Yeah. And everything that is donated to us goes towards the cause. Like I said, we don't take salaries. We don't have rent. I run it out of my office in my basement. We don't have any overhead other than to maintain the website. And I'm trying to come up with some new innovative ideas to raise funds, and I'm working on that. But we're there, and if anybody wants to help make a difference, please know that your dollars are actually going towards the goal of the organization in this case.
One more time, your website, and also how do people get your book, 3 Decades Cold? You
can get that on Amazon. You can also get it from my publisher, which is Genius Books, 3 Decades Cold, and the website for the nonprofit is www.coldcaseinitiative.org.
On that pleasant note, Chris, thank you. You're one of our few, just only 2 3-time guests.
Thank you.
Besides the ARC cases we've done with the Center City rapist and a Canadian homicide case, but you're special, like for 3 different reasons we've kind of had you on. Certainly related to Philly Homicide, the last 2. So again, thank you for coming on Cold Red, folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, subscribe, tell people about Cold Red. Go to our website, coldredpodcast.com. I want to thank our producers, Matt McLaughlin, Matt Robinson, our music coordinator, Rick Schilling. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Chris. And please, everyone out there, come back and check us out again on Cold Red.